Support comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hey, it's Paige Browning in for Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. School is back today for some middle and high schoolers, and between the rushed plan to return, shortened schedules, and many students opting to continue with remote learning, it's complicated. Dahlia Bazzaz of the Seattle Times is here to break it all down, but first, let's get you caught up. Seattle police officers may not be attending a dinner with a religious group after all. A unit within SPD sent its officers a dinner invite from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, whose leader opposes LGBTQ rights. Facing criticism about the event, Police Chief Adrian Diaz has rescinded the invitation, telling officers the event's hosts do not share the inclusive values of the SPD. Anti-tax activist Tim Eyman was already ordered to pay hefty fines as penalty for campaign finance violations and now faces millions more. A Thurston County Superior Court judge has ordered Eyman to pay nearly $2.9 million to cover the legal costs of Attorney General Bob Ferguson. Ferguson had long-running lawsuits against Eyman for violations in his anti-tax campaigns. Eyman now owes about $5.5 million in penalties. He says Ferguson is a cowardly bully going after political adversaries. And how are you liking this summer fake-out weather? For the first time this year, Seattle hit 80 degrees. It was hot and dry enough that fire crews had to jump on a handful of brush fires in King County over the weekend. But temperatures are going down this week. Highs today in the 70s, but back down to the low 60s by the weekend. It is the first day of school. Sort of. It's the first day of part-time in-person school for some middle and high schoolers in Seattle Public Schools. And it's been a long journey to get to this point, and not everyone wants to go back.
There's a lot of stuff that worries me about people going back to school.
That's Evelyn Noble Stewart. She's 16 and attends Ballard High School. She will not be returning to in-person school this week. One of her concerns, many students will be coming back from traveling over spring break.
And they're going to be bringing back all the germs. So
whether students choose to go back in person or not, the remaining school year brings a lot of angst for students, parents, teachers, and staff. And here to walk us through that is Dahlia Bazzaz. She's an education reporter at the Seattle Times. Hey, Dahlia.
Hey there, Paige.
So school opens up in person today for middle and high school students for the first time in more than a year in Seattle Public Schools. Some are going back to the classroom. But Dahlia, I just want to start with how many students are choosing not to come back?
That's a really great question. So we know there are about 26,000 or so middle and high school students who would be eligible to come back in this round of reopening. And we know from surveys of Seattle Public Schools families that at least 10,000 middle and high schoolers have opted in to come back. There was a very high no response rate for some populations of that survey. So we're not sure exactly. We still haven't received some updated numbers from the district, but it should be at least 10,000.
And what are the main reasons that you're hearing for students not wanting to come back to school buildings?
It's a mixture of things. I think one of the predominant ones, which you mentioned at the top of the show, is health and safety concerns. I think that especially for students who aren't going to be eligible to receive the vaccine because of their age, there is concern around that. There's also concern around disrupting schedules this late in the school year because the schedule for return would require students to make this transition in the middle of the day. After learning remotely for a few hours, they have about 45 minutes to make it to their schools. And for some kids that don't have transportation or maybe don't have parents to drop them off, that's going to be kind of difficult to squeeze that in because that's also their time for lunch. So there's some logistical concerns and some health concerns.
So, Dahlia, we've been talking about why students might be deciding not to return to school. Are there any demographic differences? Are there any differences that you have seen or heard of that you could point out?
Yes. As national research has pointed out, and Seattle Public School surveys have somewhat bore this out, there are racial differences in who is deciding to come back to school in person. So, for example, Black and Asian families tend to be less likely than white families to opt into school in person. And the most complete survey that I've seen, and this is of elementary and middle school students, shows that most students of color do opt into in-person instruction, but it's pretty split. So 48.9% of those families opted into in-person instruction, and 43.4% opted for remote learning. And then you can see for white families, about 77% opted for in-person instruction and 20.5% opted for remote learning. So there is a difference there.
That's a significant difference. Do we know why?
It's a mixture of reasons. Part of it is just because communities of color have been hit harder by the virus compared to white families, if we think about who works in essential worker roles. And there's also there's concern about in-person learning in general. You know, prior to the pandemic, there were all sorts of concerns about racism inside school buildings, whether it's school discipline, things having to do with the school-to-prison pipeline, racist treatment of students by teachers. So I think that there's all those sort of factors that play into that.
When we're thinking about actually going back to the school buildings, this involves a lot of people, not just the students, but parents, teachers, the school staff. How difficult was it to make this happen?
Well, I think Seattle wasn't originally prepared to bring back students at this scale before Governor Inslee issued a proclamation basically ordering schools to reopen for secondary students. So it really was this sort of mad dash. The district and the Seattle Teachers Union had to negotiate a contract, and they spent a third of the time negotiating the high school and middle school contract as they did the elementary school contract. So it was pretty fast. And teachers hadn't even voted on whether to approve this contract before they were ordered back into buildings to start preparing their classrooms and do in-person trainings. So it was a very rushed process by everyone that I've spoken with. And teachers really didn't even have a sense of who would be back in their classrooms until the very, very last days before spring break.
Okay, and we've covered the challenges here, but let's talk about the upside. There's a reason that we're bringing students back to the classroom. One of them that Governor Jay Inslee has talked about is mental health concerns. And that's something that's very real for high school and middle school and possibly even elementary school students. What are some of the reasons that people are thrilled to be back in the classroom?
I think that there's obviously that face-to-face connection between students and teachers, which everyone pretty much agrees it can't be replicated in the same ways online. I think students are looking forward to being able to ask questions of their teachers that, you know, they felt maybe shy about raising online, or maybe just didn't want to go through the process of sending questions over email or, litigating it in the middle of a Zoom call. So they're able
Fewer emails. I'm sure they won't complain about that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I was speaking to a student last week where, she was saying, sometimes I just give up because I just get frustrated, or, she has this AP calculus class and she's going through all these really difficult concepts, and she's reaching out to some kids who are in her breakout room team. They're kind of assigned these partners, and then she's asking the same questions of her teacher. But if she doesn't get sort of an answer that really explains it or unlocks the concept for her, she just kind of gives up. And so I think students are looking forward to being able to have a face to go to with any sort of concerns about their grades. And then also students, I think, have been very isolated in the last year, and seeing one another is going to be a huge upside for those kids that can make it work.
Is there some sort of first day of school excitement here?
I think so, yeah. I think there's excitement. I think there's nervousness, which is also a part of the back to school experience. Mm-hmm. But I think people are excited to be back in their buildings. I talked to a student who is attending Roosevelt High School. She's never been inside her school building before. She's a freshman. Oh, wow. So she made that whole high school or middle school to high school transition and has never been inside. So she's very excited, and she's going to make that really short passing period between her online remote schedule in the morning and the afternoon in-person work. She's going to bring a sandwich in her hand and bike to school.
Dahlia, what threads are you going to be following as the school year continues?
For me, I'm interested in seeing what lessons are going to be learned through this. I think there's a lot to learn here. There's, school districts are going to be measuring how students have been doing with literacy, which I'm particularly interested in. That's kind of one of the big concerns, is just making sure students are able to read. And I'm also going to be following the results of some surveys that have gone out. The state education department has this youth mental health survey that they're launching, and they're going to have the results in June, and I'm going to be looking at that. So those are a couple of things.
All right. Well, we will be watching for your reporting, Dahlia, and good luck to everyone who's going back to their first day of school in person today. I've been chatting with Dahlia Bazzaz, education reporter at the Seattle Times. Thank you so much, Dahlia.
Thanks for having me.
Seattle Now is produced by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Clare McGrane, and Jason Pagano. Special thanks to Morgan White for production assistance on today's episode. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Paige Browning. See you next time.